Constitution shall be the supreme law of the land. Rule of law establishes that no person under the United States Constitution is above or below the law, creating equality among citizens with the three branches of government. The United States Constitution was established during the Enlightenment, in which John Locke's idea of a social contract inspired colonists to establish a system in which people willingly gave up certain rights for security and government. It also established the rule of law's idea of equality through the phrase, all men are created equal.
The rule of law has three different interpretations. In one interpretation, the term means rule according to law. This means that no individual can be ordered by the government to pay civil damages or suffer criminal punishment except in strict accordance with well-established and clearly defined laws and procedures. In Powell v. Alabama, 9 African Americans were accused of raping 2 Caucasian women, and Alabama officials sprinted through 3 trials in one day. This was a direct violation of the due process rights.
The second interpretation is the rule under the law, meaning no branch of government is above law, and no public official may act arbitrarily or unilaterally outside the law. In the Watergate scandal, rule of law was upheld in the United States in Nixon, when the Supreme Court ruled that not even the president is above the law.
Additionally, in this context, it also means that no one citizen is above any other citizen. An example of this is the 15th Amendment, which states that the right to vote shall not be abridged by race, color, or previous condition of servitude. Conversely, congressional insider trading allowed for elected officials to buy or sell securities based on information gained on the job, but was recently banned by the Stock Act.
Lastly, the term means rule according to a higher law, which means the government cannot enforce any written law unless it conforms to unwritten universal principles of fairness, morality, and justice. This can be seen with Supreme Court case Loving v. Virginia, in which 2 people were forbid to marry due to different races.
This expectation of equality is not protected in other nations. In the Middle East, specifically in Afghanistan, the Taliban established an oppressive regime that administers cruel public punishment, limits women's education, and prevents access to the free market of ideas.
People under a government that lacks rule of law often desire equality in rights, so they look to the United States system as an example. This can be seen in documents of other nations where parts of our Declaration of Independence are apparent. In France's Declaration of Rights in 1789, key phrases such as inalienable and sacred rights of man and free communication demonstrate inspiration from the United States Constitution.
Through the rule of law, power is divided, allowing citizens to have power to make changes and ultimately hold the government accountable with specific rules and laws they must adhere to. The United States' commitment to the rule of law is seen through the constant edits, additions, or occasional abandonments to documents. In the Declaration of Independence, commitment to the rule of law was seen in the list of grievances, when the colonists were willing to call out their king in order to form a better society.
Further, the Articles of Confederation stated each state retains its sovereignty, freedom, and independence, which is not expressly delegated to the United States, which violated the idea of rule under law because each individual state could consider themselves sovereign nations. Contrastingly, the 10th Amendment of the Bill of Rights states, the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution are reserved to the states respectively or to the people.
Through this, the rule under law is being upheld because any power that is not entrusted specifically by the Constitution is given to the states and people to decide. This ensures that the Constitution is the law of the land and that the government power is not above the citizens, protecting equality.
The preamble to the Constitution begins with the phrase, "We the people." It was not a dictator or king claiming divine right, but the people that ensured justice, domestic tranquility, and secure the blessings of liberty. Society is not perfect, making our Constitution imperfect. However, history has shown that our system, by enforcing rule of law, has the capability to improve along with society.
Thank you.
Thank you.
What is better at upholding the rule of law? An inquisitorial system like they have in Europe, or an adversarial system such as that in most European countries?
In some ways, the inquisitorial system is better because you have one person who's judging and inquiring of both sides, whereas in an adversarial system, you can get 2 parties that are simply trying to, or they're getting paid to try and put the other person in jail or to defend their client. And so that can lead to them being more partial to their client and therefore not protecting the rule of law more than just helping their client.
However, with an adversary system, you have jury who will also be a check on the one person with an inquisitorial system that would be making all the calls. So this would ultimately lead to a more fair decision rather than one person determining the fate and the prosecution and the decision for a crime committed.
However, there are some problems with the adversary system. One of them is the fact that you hire lawyers to defend you, and somebody will not have the same status of lawyer. For example, in the O.J. Simpson case, he was able to hire a very good lawyer because he has a lot of money, whereas somebody else in his case would not have had the same status of a lawyer, and he was found not guilty even though there was a lot of facts saying that he was. He just had a really good lawyer. So that's one of the problems with this system.
Why is the Magna Carta considered the foundation of the idea of the rule of law?
The Magna Carta, first limited the power of the king because it was something that the king had to abide by, and so it created the idea of rule of law because it said that even a king was had to follow the ideas of the law just as the common man.
Is there more to that question?
What's the difference between rule of man and rule of law? Can you distinguish between the idea of rule of man versus the idea of rule of law?
Okay, so rule of law is based on the idea that there's a higher foundation for every law. So there's all law are laws under God. So there's always a higher law. Whereas the rule of man is just that there's someone else who's considered to be on a higher level that will be judging you.
Which can also be reflected with rule of law and then rule by law. So with rule by law, it was basically a king or a monarch that decided what the law would be, which ultimately led to an unstable government and an unstable monarchy. However, with rule of law, there are set laws that people must abide by that don't create a unproportional level of, let's say, reputation.
You guys mentioned in your testimony the idea of higher law and in the understanding of rule of law. What if Sharia law or Muslim law, because I'm a Muslim, I consider it to be higher law and is in direct violation of some statute, either in a state or the national government? Is it a violation of the First Amendment for me not to be able to carry out my religious practice?
There's three interpretations, or we listed three interpretations of it, and that is just one of them. So there's two other parts, and above all, you do have your rights to your Muslim religion, but at the same time, it can't come endangering other people. So you can still practice what you want, and it can be your morals through your religion can lead you to believe one thing, but at the same time, you need to still remain underneath the rule of law, the same as everybody else.
Further, in the Supreme Court case, it's the really awkward church name versus the state of Florida. If someone can tell me that. Anyways, they wanted to establish a church in which they believed in sacrificing animals, and this violated the Florida statute that they made after they realized that they were coming to establish their church. So with this, they ruled that the church was able to establish themselves. However, if there's compelling interest that something is going to be violated within a human right, the form of higher law or this form of their religion would not be considered because of the fact that the interest and the safety of other people would come before that.
When does individual rights and compelling state interests come into conflict?
Well, even as we just mentioned with the Supreme Court case, compelling state interest and individual rights come to conflict when someone's individual rights, such as being able to sacrifice, let's say someone has an individual right that they want to kill somebody, when their individual right infringes on someone else's individual rights, that comes in and conforms with the compelling state interest that one other person's individual rights would be infringed on.
Okay, time.
Oh, wow.
Time.
Could I just say the theory of forfeiture for that?
Explain.
So with the theory of forfeiture, like, your individual rights are given up when it comes to limits with someone else's individual rights?
Yes, you can.
Okay.
Okay. Testimony is 407. I think you guys can cut your full thing of the 10th Amendment. I think I made that note when you guys did it the other night too at UNR. I think it adds.
Okay.
I don't think you need to quote the whole thing.
Yeah.
I think it's just long, and you can just
It's an awkward.
it's
Should
awkward.
we just take it out?
By Sean, I think you can take it out or just paraphrase it and still uphold
So
the
that
meaning.
whole chunk.
Yeah, the whole chunk. I mean, I don't think it's necessary to quote the whole
Doesn't
thing.
add that much.
It doesn't add that much to it. I mean, like they had. I think you guys had the whole Fourth Amendment in yours at one point, or no, Unit 1 has the whole Fourth Amendment because of the comparison between.
That was.
I don't think it's not necessary. Okay. Got to answer. You got to step up. I know you're trying to listen and answer questions. You got to come up with it. You got to get to it, and you got to start it off. If you didn't answer the first one, you got to get to it. All right, because you didn't answer one, and you guys got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 questions. Okay, you got to get there. Come up with it. Even if it's something quick and to the point, you get people thinking. All right, so you got to get there. Don't be afraid. Get up there and speak. Inquisitorial versus adversary. I know we haven't gone through it yet in class. There's a section in your textbook on it. We're going to do some reading on it when we get to Unit 3. But for you guys, kind of need to know some of the basic points of it so that you can use it as a grab bag of stuff. Inquisitorial still has jury systems.
Really?
Yeah,
Because I thought it was like the judge that played the juror, and then they played out like the detective
in some,
too.
but in others they don't. So you can't be collected as inquisitorial doesn't have jury systems because sometimes they do have jury systems. Okay, it's complex, but just to have those grab bags, right?
Okay.
What's another more famous example of other than OJ, of a person that was guilty in the court of public opinion but was not guilty in the court of law? Casey Anthony, right? I would use Casey Anthony because, I mean,
Okay.
and I would use that phrasing. Same with OJ. We don't know OJ was guilty. Were you at the trial?
Did I?
You made the assumption that there was enough
there
evidence.
were a lot of facts that led us to believe that. Is that still kind of
Facts where? In court or in public opinion?
public opinion?
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
So that's important, okay? The court of public opinion is much different than a court of
Yeah,
law.
I got it.
So I think that's something you got to say. While someone may seem guilty in the court of public opinion, what happens in the courtroom is much different.
Was
Okay.
that the right time to bring up that case?
It was. It
Okay.
definitely was the right time. But I just want to kind of change those
Okay, yeah,
those
we'll worry about
opinions,
that.
right? So, Brent, you were good, but you can give me an example on inquisitorial versus adversary. You came up with the answer, but you need to give me something. What's
It was like Great Britain or something.
Great Britain? What's the case in Italy of the student who like murdered their roommate? What is it? Amanda Knox. Good. The Amanda Knox one. You guys know about the Amanda Knox one? So I can't remember it, but she was found guilty and then not guilty through the inquisitorial system because because of the way of the facts, because they do a tiered court system. And she was arrested, blah 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 blah, but she was ended up being not guilty of it through the inquisitorial system. So knowing the Amanda Knox thing, because she's an American citizen going to school in Italy, so it had ties. But knowing those things would be good. Rule of man versus rule of law. I think you guys did a good job of distinguishing. We've got to make sure rule of man and say it explicitly. The rule of man is where I make the law, and I'm not a subject to my own law. Okay? Kim Jong-il or Kim Jong-un is rule of man. He makes his rule, and it's rule by one, or rule, you can phrase it, rule, or how would I say that phrasing? Rule of man, or rule by law, right? I rule, they're synonymous, but I'm not subject to it.
Wait, so the rule of man and the rule by law are the same thing?
The same thing,
Okay, because
yeah.
that's what I was confused
Yeah,
about.
they're the same idea. They're rule of a man or by a man instead of rule
According to the law.
according to the law.
Okay, because that's
Okay.
why I want to answer, because I was confused about
Yeah.
that.
So they're the same idea. So just making sure you make that distinction, and then one thing is important. Again, you got to be careful. Like you referred back to your testimony. No. Just make sure when you do it, you do it in a way that you're not being conniving. Like you didn't hear what we said. Does that make sense? Okay. Compelling state interest. You kind of got to it, and it's all about Bui
Versus the state.
versus city of
Hialeah.
Hialeah. But that was a good example. You got to be careful in Sharia law because Sharia law may have nothing to do with. I may not be violating any sort of rights of other people, but my actions still may be against the law. But I'm still going to believe in my Sharia law. So where's the line? Okay, those are things we got to figure out. Where's the line? And then I was trying to get compelling state interest, and there's a lot of examples where you guys need to know cases of compelling state interest in which the state won, and cases in which the individual won. Okay, Oregon,
Was it
Smith versus
Okay,
Oregon.
I wasn't sure if it was.
Okay, Texas versus Johnson, Matt versus Ohio, right? Individual rights versus compelling state interest. You guys have questions?
Did Smith v. Oregon, the